Aaliyah sat quietly in the back seat of her mother's old car, staring out the window as they drove through the unfamiliar streets. The houses here were different: big lawns, trimmed hedges, and shiny cars parked neatly in the driveways. Everything seemed cleaner, quieter, and somehow colder than the bustling neighborhood she had left behind. She clutched her backpack tightly in her lap, her fingers playing with the zipper. Today was the first day at her new school, and her stomach felt like it was full of restless butterflies. She had been the new girl before, but this time felt different. Her old school was full of familiar faces: kids she had grown up with, neighbors she'd known since childhood. Here, she didn't know a single person. The thought of walking into a crowded hallway full of strangers made her heartbeat quicken. Her mother glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You'll be fine, baby," she said with a warm smile. "Just be yourself. People will see how amazing you are." Aaliyah smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wanted to believe her mother, but deep down, she knew things weren't always that simple. Sometimes people didn't see the real youth, they only saw what they wanted to see. And she was painfully aware that her dark skin and long braids would make her stand out in this mostly white suburban school. When they pulled up in front of the building, Aaliyah stared at the tall brick walls and the wide glass doors. Groups of students were already gathering outside, laughing and talking as if they had known each other forever. No one seemed nervous or out of place except her. She took a deep breath, pushed open the car door, and stepped out, feeling the cool morning air brush against her face. Her mother wished her luck and drove away, leaving her standing there with her backpack slung over one shoulder. The noise of the students filled her ears: shouts, laughter, the clanging of lockers in the distance. She adjusted her hoodie and started walking toward the entrance, trying not to make too much eye contact. Inside, the hallways felt even busier. Teenagers rushed past her, some holding coffee cups, others dragging oversized sports bags. Posters for the upcoming football game covered the walls. The smell of perfume, paper, and cafeteria food mixed in the air. She moved slowly, scanning the hallway numbers on the wall, trying to find her locker. She noticed the glances almost immediately. A few students' eyes lingered on her a little longer than normal. Some looked away quickly, but others whispered to their friends. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but the little smirks on their faces told her enough. Aaliyah wasn't the type to assume the worst, but she had seen this before. People noticed when you didn't look like everyone else. When she finally found her locker, she struggled to get it open. She twisted the lock twice, then 3 times, her hands trembling slightly. That's when a tall boy with messy blonde hair walked by and muttered something under his breath, making 2 other boys laugh. She didn't catch the words, but she felt the sting of it anyway. She pretended not to hear and focused on her combination until the locker finally clicked open. Her first class was English, and she walked in just as the bell rang. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, welcomed her and asked her to introduce herself. Ollie hated this part. She stood at the front of the class, feeling every pair of eyes on her. "My name's Aaliyah," she said softly. "I just moved here." "Welcome, Aaliyah," the teacher said cheerfully. "We're glad to have you." But the class remained silent. She heard a chair creak as someone leaned over to whisper to their friend. A couple of students gave her polite smiles, but most just looked at her as if she were a puzzle they didn't feel like solving. She took a seat near the back, pulling her notebook from her bag. She kept her head down, pretending to read the notes on the board, but she could still feel the weight of their stares. It wasn't open hostility, at least, not yet. 'Twas the quiet kind, the kind that made you feel like you didn't belong, without anyone having to say it outright. By lunchtime, Aaliyah was exhausted. Navigating the crowded hallways, figuring out where her classes were, and ignoring the stares had drained her energy. She entered the cafeteria and saw tables full of laughing groups. every seat seemingly taken. Her eyes darted around, searching for a spot. Eventually, she found an empty table in the corner and sat alone, unpacking the lunch her mother had made. As she ate, she watched the room. There were the cheerleaders in their matching jackets, the football players tossing grapes at each other, the art kids with their sketchbooks, and the quiet students buried in books. Everyone seemed to have their place except her. Halfway through her sandwich, she felt someone walking past behind her. A high-pitched giggle followed, and then she heard a mocking voice say, "Who's the new girl?" "She looks like she came out of some street fight." A chorus of laughter followed. Aaliyah froze for a moment, her jaw tightening, but she didn't turn around. She had learned that sometimes the best thing to do was to ignore it at least, until she understood who she was dealing with. When the final bell rang at the end of the day, she walked out of the building with a deep sigh. The sky was turning a soft pink, and the air smelled faintly of rain. She spotted her mother's car in the pickup lane and climbed inside. "How was it?" her mother asked. Aaliyah forced a small smile. "It was okay. It's just a lot to take in." Her mother gave her a reassuring squeeze on the hand. "You'll make friends soon. Just give it time." But as they drove home, Aaliyah looked out the window and thought about the whispers, the stares, and the quiet little jabs. She wasn't afraid, but she knew deep down that this school was going to test her in ways she hadn't faced before. What she didn't realize was that she was about to surprise everyone, including herself. The next morning, Aaliyah walked into school a little earlier than usual, hoping the quiet hallways would help her feel more at ease. She had spent the night telling herself that maybe she had imagined the strange looks yesterday. Maybe the whispers weren't really about her. It was a new school, and sometimes her mind had a way of turning small things into big ones. But as she made her way to her locker, she noticed it again, that feeling of being watched. Not by everyone, but by a specific group. They were standing near the water fountain, 3 girls with perfectly straight hair, flawless makeup, and clothes that looked like they had been pulled straight out of a fashion magazine. Next to them were 2 boys in varsity jackets, the kind of guys who always seemed to have the attention of the whole school. They didn't try to hide the fact that they were looking at her. In fact, it felt like they wanted her to notice. One of the girls leaned toward the others and whispered something. Then they all laughed, not the friendly kind of laugh, but the kind that comes with a side of judgment. Aaliyah pretended not to see them and kept walking, her locker key trembling slightly in her hand. When she opened her locker, she found a small folded piece of paper stuck between her books. At first, she thought maybe it was a welcome note from a friendly student. But as she unfolded it, she saw 3 words written in messy black marker. "Go back home." Her stomach tightened. She stood there for a moment, staring at the words. She didn't want to give whoever wrote it the satisfaction of seeing her upset, so she crumpled it and shoved it deep into her backpack. Still, the message followed her like a shadow for the rest of the day. In math class, the group sat 2 rows behind her. Every time the teacher turned to write on the board, she could hear low chuckles and the sound of someone tapping a pencil rhythmically against the desk. At one point, she caught one of the boys making a mocking boxing motion toward her, throwing pretend punches in the air as the others grinned. She frowned, not quite understanding why they were targeting her. She hadn't spoken a single word to them. At lunch, she decided to sit in the same corner table as yesterday. It was a safe distance from most of the crowd, and she liked the view of the big windows looking out onto the football field. She had just taken a bite of her apple when one of the girls from the group walked past her table, accidentally bumping her shoulder hard enough to make her spill some water on her tray. "Oh, sorry," the girl said, with a smirk that made it clear she wasn't sorry at all. Aaliyah didn't respond. She simply wiped the spill and continued eating. But she could feel the group watching her from across the cafeteria. It was like they were testing her, poking at her in small ways to see how much she could take before reacting. After lunch, In the hallway, it happened again. As Aaliyah was heading toward her science class, one of the boys accidentally kicked her backpack from behind, making it slide off her shoulder. She turned, ready to say something, but he was already walking away, grinning at his friends. By the end of the day, she knew without a doubt that it wasn't her imagination. This group had singled her out for some reason. Maybe it was because she was new. Maybe it was because she didn't try to blend in. Or maybe it was because she was different in a way they couldn't understand. Whatever the reason, they had made her their target. On the walk home, she kept replaying the small moments in her mind, the note in her locker, the whispers, the bumps, the stares. She wasn't the type to pick fights, but she also wasn't the type to let people push her around forever. What they didn't know was that Aaliyah had grown up in a neighborhood where respect had to be earned, not handed out. She had learned from a young age how to defend herself not just with words, but with action, if necessary. Years of martial arts training had taught her discipline, patience, and how to read people's moves before they made them. She had never used it outside of the gym. But something told her that the day was coming when she might have to. For now, she decided to watch and wait. Let them think she was just another quiet new girl. Let them underestimate her, because when the time came, they were going to realize they had picked on the wrong person. The first week passed. Aaliyah thought maybe things would settle down. She kept her head down, stayed out of trouble, and avoided eye contact with the group that had made her their quiet enemy. But instead of getting bored and moving on, they seemed to be just getting started. It began with the small, childish tricks, the kind that didn't leave bruises but could chip away at your patience. One morning, Aaliyah opened her locker and found all her books scattered on the floor. The combination lock was still there, which meant someone must have watched her open it before and memorized the code. Her notebooks had doodles in the margins, ugly sketches with exaggerated lips and hair, mocking her appearance. She quietly gathered them, refusing to let anyone see how much it annoyed her. Later that day, in history class, one of the girls slid a note onto her desk. At first glance, it looked like a scrap of homework. But when Aaliyah unfolded it, the words hit her like a slap. "Do you even belong here?" The O in belong had been drawn like a target. She didn't need to look to know who it came from. By lunch, the games became more public. As she walked past the cafeteria line, one of the boys made a loud fake cough and muttered something under his breaths, something with the word ghetto in it. His friends laughed, their voices carrying over the chatter of the room. Aaliyah kept walking, gripping her tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. The worst came during gym class. They were playing basketball, and Aaliyah, who had always been quick on her feet, managed to steal the ball from one of the girls in the group. She dribbled toward the hoop, but just as she went for a shot, she felt a hard shove from behind. She stumbled, catching herself before she hit the floor, but the ball bounced away. The gym teacher didn't see it happen, and the girl who shoved her just shrugged with a fake innocent smile. "You okay?" Another player asked quietly. "Yeah," Aaliyah said, forcing a calm voice. But inside, she was boiling. She could take a joke, she could take a little teasing, but this was different. This wasn't about fun. It was about humiliation. They wanted to make her feel small, outnumbered, and powerless. Over the next few days, they grew bolder. In the hallway, one of the boys would accidentally bump into her shoulder hard enough to make her drop her books. When she knelt to pick them up, they would walk away without looking back. In the cafeteria, they started sitting closer to her table, making sure their jokes were loud enough for her to hear. One afternoon, as she was leaving science class, Aaliyah overheard them near the lockers. "Bet she can't even fight," one of the boys said, laughing. "She's all talk. She's scared," another added. "Nah," the girl with the straight hair said with a smirk. "She's just too weak to do anything." They didn't know that Aaliyah had stopped just around the corner. She stood there, silent, listening, her jaw tightening with every word. She wanted to storm out, to tell them exactly what she thought of them, but years of self-control kept her in place. She wasn't going to give them the reaction they wanted. That night at home, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock, but her mind was loud. She thought about her old neighborhood, the friends, who would have had her back in a heartbeat. Here, she was on her own, and that meant she had to be smart. She thought about her martial arts classes, the hours of training, the sweat, the discipline her instructor drilled into her. Patience is your first weapon, he used to say. Strike only when you must, and when you do, make it count. The bullies didn't know that side of her yet. They thought they were picking on a defenseless new girl. They thought she would take it forever. But the more they pushed, the closer they were getting to a line they didn't want to cross. By the time Friday rolled around, the tension around Aliyah had thickened like a storm cloud ready to burst. She could feel it in the way the group's laughter seemed louder whenever she was nearby. She could feel it in the stares that followed her down the hallway, like they were waiting for the perfect moment to make their next move. That moment came. In the cafeteria, it started like any other lunch break. Aliyah grabbed her tray chicken nuggets, apple slices, a small carton of milk and headed to her usual corner table. She had just sat down and taken her first bite when she noticed them. Watching her, all 5 of them were huddled at a table in the center of the room, whispering and grinning like they had already planned something. At first, she ignored them. She focused on her food, scrolling through her phone. But then, the room went quiet or not, completely silent, but just enough for her to feel that uneasy shift in the air. She looked up just in time to see one of the girls from the group walking toward her, holding a half-empty plastic cup filled with red fruit punch. The girl stopped at Aliyah's table and gave her a sweet, fake smile. "Psst," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. And before Aliyah could react, the girl tipped the cup forward, pouring the sticky red liquid over Aliyah's head. Gasps erupted around the cafeteria, followed by a chorus of laughter. Some kids pulled out their phones, already recording. The punch soaked into Aliyah's hoodie, dripped down her braids, and pooled on the table in front of her. For a second, she just sat there, frozen. She could hear the laughter echoing in her ears, louder than anything else in the room. Her heart pounded, not from embarrassment, but from the raw, sharp heat of anger building inside her. The girl leaned closer, her voice low enough that only Aliyah could hear. "Welcome to our school, new girl." Then she turned away, strutting back to her table like she had just won something. Aliyah stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. The room seemed to hold its breath. She didn't shout. She didn't throw anything back. She simply grabbed a napkin, wiped her face, and walked out of the cafeteria without looking back. But inside, she wasn't hurt. She wasn't embarrassed. She was done. All afternoon, the scene replayed in her head. The smirk on that girl's face. The sound of everyone laughing. The way they had looked at her like she was weak. Each time she thought about it, the anger sharpened, but so did her focus. She knew this wasn't going to stop on its own. The group wasn't going to suddenly get bored and leave her alone. No, they were going to keep pushing, keep trying to humiliate her, lest she gave them a reason to stop. By the final bell, her decision was made. She was going to make sure that the next time they came for her, it wouldn't end the way they expected. The weekend didn't cool Aliyah's anger. If anything, it gave it more time to burn. She didn't spend it sulking, she spent it thinking. Every move, every insult, every smirk from that group had played over in her mind like a movie she couldn't pause. She remembered the fruit punch, dripping down her braids, the sound of their laughter, and how the girl had whispered in her ear like she owned the school by Monday morning. She was calm on the outside, but locked in on the inside. She wasn't planning on starting trouble, but she knew it was coming to her whether she wanted it or not. And this time, she wasn't going to walk away. The day went by like a slow drumbeat, every class ticking closer to the inevitable. The group's taunts had grown quieter in the hallways, less obvious, almost like they were saving something for later. Their grins told her they had something planned. By the last bell, the tension was almost suffocating. Students poured out of the classrooms, heading toward buses and cars. But Aaliyah noticed something different. The group wasn't leaving. They were hanging back, clustered near the gym doors, their eyes locked on her. She kept walking toward the exit, pretending not to notice, but they stepped forward, blocking her path. "Well, well," one of the boys said, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Look who decided to show her face again." Aaliyah didn't answer. She shifted her backpack higher on her shoulder and kept her gaze steady. The tallest girl stepped closer, her smile fake and sharp. "You walked out of the cafeteria last time. You think you're too good to talk to us?" "Maybe she's just scared," another boy said, chuckling. Aaliyah's heartbeat slowed instead of sped up. It was something her martial arts instructor had taught her: control the breath, control the body, control the outcome. She didn't clench her fists yet, but she adjusted her stance, feet slightly apart. Weight balanced, one of the girls moved to her side, cutting off her escape toward the parking lot. "We just want to have a little talk," she said, her tone pretending to be casual. "Looks more like a setup," Aaliyah said finally, her voice even. That made the group laugh. But there was an edge to it, like they weren't expecting her to speak up. The boy in the varsity jacket leaned in. "So what are you going to do if it is?" And that's when it clicked for her. They weren't here to talk. They wanted to shoo a crowd to see her get scared, maybe even see her get shoved around. And as if the universe had heard her thought, she noticed a few other students lingering at a distance, watching. The bullies had made sure there would be witnesses. Her jaw tightened. "You sure you want to find out?" she said. They didn't take her seriously. They never had. And that was their mistake. The tallest boy smirked and took a step forward like he was going to shove her. His hand came up slow enough for her to read the movement before it even happened. And right there, she knew. This was the moment. The switch flipped inside her. Every warning, every insult, every act of disrespect over the past 2 weeks had built to this point. And this time, she wasn't going to let them walk away with that smirk. The boy's hand came forward fast, aiming for a shove to her shoulder. But Aaliyah was faster. Before it could even touch her, she stepped slightly to the side, letting his momentum pull him forward. In one smooth motion, she grabbed his wrist, twisted it, and used his own weight to send him stumbling past her. He caught himself against the wall, shocked. The group froze for half a second, long enough for her to see it in their eyes. That flicker of surprise, that instant of realizing they weren't dealing with the kind of new girl they thought she was. "Yo, what the?" The other boy started, but he didn't get to finish. He rushed at her, and she dropped her backpack to the ground with a thud. The strap slapped against the floor as her feet slid into a solid fighting stance, knees bent, weight balanced. When his arm swung out for a sloppy punch, she ducked low and came up with a quick, controlled strike to his forearm. To hurt, but to stun. He yelped and backed up, shaking his arm. The tallest girl stepped forward now, face twisted in anger. "Oh, you think you're tough?" she spat. Aaliyah's eyes didn't leave hers. "I don't think," she said calmly. "I know." The girl lunged, grabbing for Aaliyah's hoodie. Bad move. Aaliyah caught her wrist, turned her body sideways, and used a simple judo hip throw she'd practiced hundreds of times. The girl landed flat on her back with a loud thud, air rushing out of her lungs in a gasp. The watching students' whispers turned into full-blown gasps. Someone's phone was definitely recording now. One of the boys tried to rush her from behind. But Aaliyah felt his footsteps and shifted instinctively. She spun on her heel, blocking his arm and pushing him backward with a sharp palm strike to the chest. He stumbled, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe she'd touched him. "You done?" she asked, her voice still calm. She wasn't out of breath, not even close, but the group wasn't ready to give up their pride yet. The girl who had dumped punch on her in the cafeteria stepped forward, fury all over her face. She didn't charge right away. Maybe she was smarter than the others, but she circled Aaliyah. Looking for an opening? "You're gonna regret this," the girl hissed. Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "You first." The girl lunged suddenly, trying to grab her hair, but Aaliyah sidestepped, swept her leg low, and hooked her ankle. The girl lost her balance and went down hard, her knees smacking the ground. The crowd watching erupted into a mix of laughter and disbelief. The group had gone from hunters to prey in less than a minute. The boy in the varsity jacket looked around. Realizing their audience was no longer impressed with them, Whit was impressed with her. His face flushed with humiliation. "This ain't over," he muttered, backing away. "It is for today," Aaliyah said, picking up her backpack. She didn't gloat, didn't laugh, didn't push it further. She simply slung her bag over her. Shoulder walked past the group and headed for the exit. The hallway felt wider now, the air lighter. Every step she took was steady, measured. She knew what had just happened wasn't about winning a fight. It was about ending something that should have ended before it even began. Behind her, the group stood scattered, bruised in pride more than anything else. The whispers of the students around them grew louder, and Aaliyah knew the story would be all over the school by tomorrow morning, and for the first time since she had arrived. She didn't feel like the new girl anymore. She felt like herself again. By the time Aaliyah left the school grounds that day, the air felt different. She could still hear faint whispers behind her as she walked, and she knew exactly what they were about. What had happened near the gym was already spreading like wildfire. In an age where everyone had a phone, it didn't take more than a few minutes for the videos to start flying around. When she got home, she wasn't surprised to see unread messages from unknown numbers on her phone. Some were short, "Yo, you're a legend." Others were more dramatic. "Girl, I saw what you did. That was savage." A few even came from people she hadn't spoken to yet, inviting her to hang out. But the attention didn't make her cocky. She knew how schools worked. One moment, you're the talk of the halls. The next, people move on to the next big thing. Still, she couldn't help but feel a little lighter. For the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't feel invisible or powerless. The next morning, she braced herself for the reaction at school. She walked in with her backpack slung casually over one shoulder, head high, eyes forward. The hallway seemed to part for her, not in fear, but in something closer to respect. Students she didn't even know nodded at her or gave small smiles. She saw the group of bullies by their usual spot. They weren't laughing this time. In fact, they barely looked at her. The girl who had dumped punch on her stared down at her phone, pretending to scroll. One of the boys glanced up for half a second, then quickly looked away. Their confidence had cracked, and everyone could see it. By lunch, the change was obvious. Leah didn't sit alone anymore. A girl from her history class asked if she wanted to join her table, and soon she was talking to people who had ignored her just last week. Some were curious. Where'd you learn to fight like that? While others just wanted to share their own bullying stories. She realized something important. The fight hadn't just been about her. Other students had been dealing with the same group's behavior, but no one had stood up to them before. Her actions had sent a clear message, not just to the bullies, but to everyone watching. Over the next few days, the group's power faded. Without fear to feed on, Their influence shrank. They still whispered, still threw occasional glares her way, but they didn't touch her. They didn't bump her in the hall or slide notes into her locker anymore. And they definitely didn't try to corner her again. One afternoon, as she was leaving school, a younger freshman girl stopped her in the hallway. "Hey," the girl said shyly, "I just wanted to say, you're really brave, what you did. It made me feel like maybe I could stand up to people too." Aaliyah smiled. "You don't have to fight to stand up for yourself. Just don't let anyone decide your worth." The girl nodded, her eyes lighting up with something Aaliyah recognized, hope. It was in that moment Aaliyah understood that the fight had done more than change her own life. It had shifted something in the school's atmosphere. She had walked in as the new girl, an easy target. But now, people saw her differently, not as someone to push around, but as someone to respect. She wasn't looking for fame, and she didn't need everyone to like her. All she wanted was peace. And now? Finally, she had it. Weeks passed, and life at the new school began to settle into a rhythm. The whispers faded, the stares softened, and the sharp edge of hostility that had followed Aaliyah around was gone. She could walk into the cafeteria without scanning the room for trouble. She could focus in class without wondering if someone was plotting their next joke. The bullies still existed. She saw them every day, but their power had been broken. They no longer walked through the halls with the same swagger, no longer acted like they owned the place. It wasn't that they had suddenly become kind. They had just learned, in the most public way possible, that some people weren't going to let them get away with anything. For Aaliyah, the fight hadn't been about glory. She didn't replay the videos, didn't boast about what happened. She hadn't stepped in that moment because she wanted to be known as the savage fighter people now whispered about. She stepped in because there comes a point where walking away isn't strength anymore, it's giving someone permission to keep hurting you. She thought about the lessons her martial arts instructor had taught her years ago. A true fighter doesn't start battles. A true fighter ends them. And it wasn't just about fists or self-defense. She realized that standing up for herself had taught her something deeper. People will treat you how you let them. You can't control what others do, but you can control what you accept. One Friday afternoon, as the final bell rang, she packed her things and walked out of school feeling lighter than she had in months. On the steps outside, she saw the freshman girl she'd spoken 2 weeks earlier. The girl was laughing with friends, her shoulders no longer hunched, her eyes no longer darting nervously around the crowd. That sight meant more to Aaliyah than any cheer or compliment she had received since the fight. She realized that courage was contagious. When one person stood up, it gave others permission to do the same. As she walked home, the autumn air cooled against her face. Aaliyah smiled to herself. She had come to this school as the new black girl, the easy target. But she wasn't just the new girl anymore. She was the girl who refused to be broken, the girl who turned fear into strength, and in doing so, gave others the courage to find their own voices. She knew there would always be people in the world who tried to push others down. T. Also knew this: the moment you decide your worth isn't up for debate. No one, not a bully, not a crowd, not anyone can take it from you, and that was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life.